Stop! The mountain man's voice thunders across the dusty town square as dirt falls onto the wooden coffin below. She's my wife! The crowd freezes, shovels suspended midair. They had gathered to watch the black girl buried alive for her supposed crimes, their faces twisted with righteous fury and cruel satisfaction. Her fate was sealed, divine judgment through suffocation, they called it. But this towering giant who trades pelts and keeps to himself has just claimed her as his own. The marriage laws might protect her now, but his intervention exposes something far more dangerous, a network of secrets that could destroy the very foundations of their corrupt town. The judge's eyes narrow with deadly calculation as he realizes his carefully orchestrated scheme now hangs in the balance. Will legal protection triumph over mob justice, or will both the girl and her unexpected savior face an even worse fate than burial? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The wagon wheels creaked to a halt outside Deadwood Creek's general store. Patience Thornfield stepped down, her worn leather satchel clutched tight against her chest. 3 days in this frontier town had taught her to keep her eyes down and her voice quiet. She pushed through the store's heavy wooden door. The bell chimed overhead. Conversation stopped. Every face turned toward her with the same cold stare she'd grown accustomed to since childhood. "Help you with something?" The shopkeeper's voice carried no warmth. "I'm looking for sewing work, mending, alterations, anything you might need." The man behind the counter exchanged glances with 2 other customers. They shook their heads slowly. "Don't think we got anything for your kind here." Patience nodded and turned to leave. She'd heard those words in every town from Missouri to Colorado Territory. But she needed the work. Her coin purse held barely enough for another week's lodging. Outside, she noticed the mountain man again. He stood near his loaded pack mules, sorting through beaver pelts with methodical precision. Magnus Coldridge, the locals called him. A giant of a man who kept to himself and spoke only when conducting business. Their eyes met briefly. His expression remained unreadable. That evening, Patience sat in her cramped boarding room, stitching a torn dress by candlelight. She'd found the work after visiting every household on the outskirts of town. The pay was half what any white seamstress would earn, but it was something. A sharp knock rattled her door. "Open up. Official business." Deputy Ezra Millstone stood in the hallway, his badge catching the flickering light. Behind him loomed Judge Cornelius Blackwater, a man whose reputation for harsh justice preceded him throughout the territory. "There's been a theft," Judge Blackwater announced, pushing past her into the small room. "Silver coins taken from Murphy's General Store." Patience's heart hammered against her ribs. "I haven't stolen anything, sir." The judge ignored her protest. He moved through her few belongings with practiced efficiency. His hand disappeared into her satchel and emerged holding 3 silver coins. "Well now, what do we have here?" "Those aren't mine," Patience's voice cracked. "I've never seen them before." Deputy Millstone shifted uncomfortably. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. "The evidence speaks for itself," Judge Blackwater declared. "Theft is a serious crime in Deadwood Creek." Word spread through town like wildfire. By morning, an angry crowd had gathered in the square. Patience stood between 2 burly men who gripped her arms tight enough to leave bruises. Judge Blackwater climbed onto a wooden crate, his voice carrying across the assembled townspeople. "We are God-fearing folk. We work hard for what we have. When someone takes what doesn't belong to them, justice must be served." The crowd murmured agreement. Their faces showed no mercy, no doubt. But what punishment fits such a crime? The judge paused dramatically. "I say we let the Almighty decide, burial alive. If she's innocent, divine providence will save her. If guilty, she'll meet her maker." Cheers erupted from the crowd. Patience felt her knees buckle. This couldn't be happening. Not for coins she'd never touched. They dragged her toward a wooden coffin that had appeared as if by magic. Someone had prepared for this moment. The setup felt too convenient, too organized. Near the back of the crowd, Magnus Coldridge watched silently. His jaw tightened as the mob's bloodlust grew louder. Two men lifted Patience and dropped her into the pine box. The wood smelled of fresh sawdust and death. Above her, faces peered down with twisted satisfaction. "Any last words before we commence divine judgment?" Judge Blackwater's voice echoed from above. "I'm innocent," Patience whispered. "I've done nothing wrong." The judge nodded to his men. The first shovel of dirt hit the wooden lid with a hollow thud. Panic seized Patience's chest. The air grew thick and stale. More dirt fell, each shovelful sealing her fate. This was how she would die, alone, innocent, and forgotten. Through the gaps in the wooden planks, she could see the crowd's eager faces. They wanted this. They needed this. Her death would somehow make their lives feel more righteous. The shoveling continued. Dirt accumulated on the lid above her face. Soon the gaps would disappear entirely. Then the digging stopped. Heavy footsteps approached the grave. A deep voice cut through the crowd's murmur. "Step away from that coffin." Magnus Coleridge stood at the edge of the pit. His massive frame cast a shadow over the entire scene. The townspeople parted before him like wheat before a scythe. "This doesn't concern you, Coleridge," Judge Blackwater snapped. "Justice is being served." "Justice?" Magnus's voice carried across the silent square. "You're burying my wife." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Conversations erupted on all sides. Judge Blackwater's confident expression faltered for the first time. "Your wife?" The judge's voice rose an octave. "That's impossible." Magnus reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "Marriage certificate, legally binding in Colorado territory. Signed and witnessed 2 weeks ago in Silver Creek." Patience stared up through the wooden slats in disbelief. She'd never seen this man before 3 days ago. They'd never spoken a single word. But the paper in his hands might be the only thing standing between her and suffocation. Judge Blackwater snatched the marriage certificate from Magnus's outstretched hand. His eyes scanned the document with growing frustration. The paper bore official seals and witnessed signatures. Everything appeared legitimate. "This proves nothing," the judge declared, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Anyone can forge papers these days." Magnus stepped closer to the grave. "Dr. Isadora Fairmont validated that marriage. She's the territorial legal advisor. You questioning her authority?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Challenging territorial officials meant inviting federal scrutiny, something no frontier town wanted. Deputy Millstone cleared his throat. "Judge, if she's legally married, territorial law protects her. We can't proceed without the husband's consent." Blackwater's face reddened. His carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling. How do we know this marriage is real? They could be conspirators. Magnus pulled Patience from the coffin with surprising gentleness. She stood on shaking legs, dirt falling from her dress. The crowd watched every movement with suspicious eyes. "Been married 2 weeks," Magnus stated calmly. "Met her when she was traveling through Silver Creek. Proposed after 3 days of courtship." Patience stared at him in amazement. The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. She played along, nodding when townspeople looked her way. Judge Blackwater circled them like a predator. "Mighty convenient timing. Woman gets accused of theft. Suddenly she's got a husband." "Mighty convenient evidence, too," Magnus replied. "Silver coins appearing in her bag right when you needed them." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several townspeople exchanged glances. They'd heard whispers about the judge's methods before. "You calling me a liar, Coleridge?" Magnus met his stare without flinching. "I'm calling you a man who plants evidence." The crowd erupted in murmurs. This was dangerous territory. Accusing a judge of corruption could bring serious consequences. Blackwater raised his hands for silence. These are serious allegations, but the law is the law. If this woman is truly married, she's under her husband's protection. He paused, studying Magnus with calculating eyes. "However, I'll be investigating this marriage thoroughly. If it's fraudulent, Both parties will face federal charges. Magnus nodded. Fair enough. We'll be at my cabin if you need anything else. He placed a protective hand on Patience's shoulder. She felt the strength in his grip and the determination in his stance. This stranger had just saved her life. As they walked away from the crowd, Patience's mind raced with questions. Why had he intervened? How had he obtained a marriage certificate? What did he expect in return? The cabin sat nestled against a pine-covered hillside. Inside, rough-hewn furniture filled the single room. Animal pelts hung from the rafters. The smell of wood smoke and leather permeated everything. Magnus gestured toward a wooden chair near the fireplace. Sit. You're safe now. Patience remained standing. Why did you help me? Because what they did was wrong. That's not an answer. Magnus studied her face in the firelight. Something in her tone surprised him. Most people he'd rescued were too grateful to ask hard questions. He moved to a wooden chest in the corner. Inside lay dozens of documents, letters, and photographs. He selected several items and spread them on the rough table. Marriage certificate between Magnus Coleridge and Chen Wei, dated 6 months ago. He placed another document beside it. Marriage certificate between Magnus Coleridge and Rosa Martinez, dated 4 months ago. Patience examined the papers. Each bore official seals and witness signatures. Each protected a different woman from persecution. You marry people to save them. Marriage laws protect wives from certain punishments. Judges can't override territorial authority without cause. More documents appeared on the table. Letters of gratitude. Photographs of families. Thank you notes from people who'd found new lives in distant territories. Chen Wei was accused of poisoning livestock. Rosa Martinez faced charges for practicing medicine without a license. Both accusations were false. Patience picked up a letter written in delicate handwriting. It described a successful dress shop in Oregon Territory and a woman's gratitude for her second chance at life. How many people have you saved? 47. You're 48. The number staggered her. This mountain man had built an entire network of rescue operations disguised as a simple fur trading business. What happens now? Magnus refilled his coffee cup from a pot hanging over the fire. You rest tonight. Tomorrow, we figure out your next destination. I've got contacts in California, Oregon, even Canada. What if I don't want to leave? The question caught him off guard. Most people couldn't wait to escape their past. Staying means living as my wife, at least until the judge stops watching. Could be months. Patience nodded slowly. Better than being dead. She moved toward the bookshelf that lined one wall. Law books mixed with agricultural manuals and territorial guides. Everything a frontier rescuer would need. Her fingers traced the spine of a legal text. Magnus watched her with growing curiosity. You can read, among other things. She pulled the book from the shelf and opened it to a random page. Her eyes moved across the text with practiced ease. Most people I help can't read their own names. Patience closed the book and faced him directly. I'm not most people. Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition that their partnership might be more complex than either had anticipated. Outside, Judge Blackwater was already planning his next move. This marriage had disrupted his carefully constructed system, but every system had weaknesses. He would find theirs. Dawn broke over the mountain cabin, with golden light streaming through small windows. Patience woke on a makeshift bed near the fireplace. Magnus was already gone, his coffee cup still warm on the wooden table. She found him outside splitting firewood with methodical swings. Each strike sent wood chips flying in perfect arcs. He worked with the efficiency of a man accustomed to solitude. Sleep well? Better than I expected. She watched him stack the split logs. Thank you for the blanket. Magnus nodded toward the cabin. There's cornbread and coffee inside. We need to talk about your options. They sat across from each other at the rough table. Between them lay maps of Western territories marked with red ink. Escape routes, Magnus explained. Paths to new lives. California's got opportunities for skilled workers. Oregon Territory needs seamstresses. Canada doesn't ask too many questions about people's past. Patience studied the maps, but her attention kept drifting to the scattered documents from the night before. Marriage certificates, legal papers, correspondence from grateful people who'd found freedom. How do you keep track of everyone? Magnus pulled out a leather-bound ledger, pages filled with names, dates, and destinations. A meticulous record of lives saved and new beginnings created. Organization keeps people alive. One mistake, one forgotten detail, and the whole system falls apart. Patience examined the ledger more closely. The handwriting was clear, but the record-keeping was primitive. Important information scattered across multiple pages. No cross-references or systematic filing. Your system has problems. Magnus looked up sharply. It's worked for 3 years. It's worked despite itself. Patience pulled the ledger toward her. Look at this. Chen Wei's forwarding address is on page 12. Her marriage documentation is on page 37. Her contact information is on page 8. She flipped through more pages, pointing out inefficiencies. If Judge Blackwater demands records, you'd need hours to compile a coherent response. Hours you might not have. Magnus watched her reorganize his documents with growing amazement. Her educated background became more apparent with each suggestion. Where did you learn to do this? Miss Caroline Whitmore, daughter of my former employer. She taught me reading, writing, and bookkeeping when her father wasn't watching. Patience continued sorting papers while she spoke. She said smart people deserve education regardless of their circumstances. Got herself in trouble for saying so. What happened to her? Married a banker from Charleston. Last I heard, she was teaching children in a school for freed slaves. Magnus poured more coffee and studied this woman who'd transformed his chaotic records into organized files within an hour. You could do more than just escape, couldn't you? What do you mean? Help improve the whole operation, make it more efficient, more secure. Patience paused in her organizing. The offer intrigued her more than any escape plan to distant territories. I'd have to stay here, live as your wife, deal with Judge Blackwater's suspicions. That's the risk. She looked around the cabin that had become her refuge. Outside these walls lay a hostile town, but inside grew the possibility of something more meaningful than simple survival. I'll stay. Magnus nodded slowly. Then we better make this marriage look convincing. Over the following days, they established routines that would satisfy suspicious observers. Patience accompanied Magnus to town for supplies. She took his arm when they walked. She called him husband when others could hear. The townspeople watched their every interaction with critical eyes. Some seemed convinced by the performance. Others remained skeptical. Judge Blackwater proved most persistent in his scrutiny. He appeared wherever they conducted business, studying their behavior for signs of deception. How long you two planning to stay in Deadwood Creek? He asked during one encounter at the general store. Long as it takes to prepare for winter, Magnus replied. My wife's not used to mountain cold. Patience played her part, staying close to Magnus and speaking only when addressed directly. But she listened to everything, filing away details about the judge's questions and concerns. Back at the cabin, she continued reorganizing Magnus's rescue network documentation. The work revealed disturbing patterns in Judge Blackwater's behavior. Look at these dates, she said, spreading papers across the table. Chen Wei was accused on March 15th, Rosa Martinez on April 20th, the Garrett family on May 10th. Magnus studied the timeline she'd created. What am I looking at? Property seizures. Every person you've rescued lost land or possessions to the court before you saved them. She pulled out additional documents Magnus had collected but never properly analyzed. Blackwater isn't just corrupt. He's systematic. He targets people with valuable property, manufactures evidence, then confiscates everything when they're convicted. The scope of the conspiracy became clear as Patience organized the evidence. Dozens of victims, thousands of dollars in stolen assets, a criminal enterprise disguised as frontier justice. He's been doing this for years, Magnus said quietly, and selling the seized property to his associates at bargain prices. Patience held up a bill of sale. This farm sold for $50. It's worth 20 times that amount. Magnus leaned back in his chair. He'd saved individuals but missed the larger criminal operation. What do we do with this information? We use it. Patience's eyes held a determination Magnus hadn't seen before. But first, we need more evidence. And we need to contact someone with real authority. Dr. Fairmont? Dr. Fairmont. Outside, Deputy Millstone rode slowly past the cabin. He'd been making these passes twice daily since the marriage revelation. Judge Blackwater's orders, no doubt. But today Millstone dismounted and approached the door. His knock was hesitant, almost apologetic. Magnus opened the door cautiously. Deputy. Mr. Coldridge. Ma'am. Millstone touched his hat brim. Judge wants to see you both tomorrow morning. Official business. What kind of business? Questions about your marriage. Federal investigators are coming next week. Deputy Millstone's warning echoed in Patience's mind as she watched him ride away. Federal investigators meant serious consequences. If they discovered the marriage fraud, both she and Magnus would face prison. We have 1 week, Magnus said grimly. Time to disappear. Patience shook her head. Running makes us look guilty. We need to turn this around. How do you turn around federal investigators? By giving them a bigger criminal to prosecute. She spread their organized evidence across the table. Property seizures, forged documents, witness statements from Magnus's rescued contacts, the pieces of Judge Blackwater's criminal enterprise laid bare. This is circumstantial. We need concrete proof of his corruption. Magnus studied the papers. What kind of proof? His appointment documents, financial records, something that proves he's operating illegally. That night, Patience disguised herself in Magnus's oversized coat and hat. She moved through Deadwood Creek's back alleys like a shadow, avoiding the main streets where Deputy Millstone conducted his patrols. Her first stop was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow whose husband had lost their farm to Blackwater's court 6 months earlier. He said Thomas owed back taxes, Mrs. Henderson whispered from her doorway, but we paid every penny. I've got the receipts. Patience carefully copied the receipt numbers into a small notebook. Evidence of fraudulent tax claims. At the boarding house, she spoke with Jake Morrison, a former ranch hand who'd witnessed several property seizures. Judge always had the same 3 men bidding at his auctions: Murphy from the general store, Banker Williams, and that lawyer from Silver Creek. More evidence of coordinated fraud. Patience documented everything. Her most dangerous stop came at the courthouse itself. The building stood empty after midnight, its windows dark and unwelcoming. But inside lay the records she needed most. The lock on the side door proved surprisingly simple. Miss Caroline had taught her more than just reading and writing during those secret lessons years ago. Judge Blackwater's office reeked of tobacco and ambition. His desk held stacks of legal documents, property deeds, and correspondence. Patience worked by moonlight, photographing pages with a small camera Magnus used for documenting his rescues. She found what she was looking for in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. Blackwater's original appointment papers from the territorial government. The signatures looked wrong. The seals seemed suspicious. But the real discovery came in his personal correspondence. Letters from territorial officials she'd never heard of. References to payments and favors. A network of corruption extending far beyond Deadwood Creek. One letter made her heart race. It was addressed to someone called Federal Marshal Johnson and discussed the Coldridge problem and permanent solutions. There was no Federal Marshal Johnson in the territorial directory. She'd checked Magnus's reference books thoroughly. Patience photographed everything quickly. Dawn was approaching, and Deputy Millstone would begin his morning rounds soon. Back at the cabin, she developed the photographs in Magnus's makeshift darkroom. The evidence was even more damning in daylight. Look at this signature, she said, comparing Blackwater's appointment papers to official territorial documents Magnus had collected. The territorial seal is wrong. The paper stock is different. Magnus examined the photographs with growing amazement. You're saying he's not really a judge? I'm saying his appointment is fraudulent. Every ruling he's made, every property he's seized, every punishment he's imposed is legally invalid. The implications staggered them both. If Blackwater had no legal authority, his victims could reclaim everything they'd lost. "We need to contact Dr. Fairmont immediately," Patience said. Magnus pulled out paper and ink. "What do we tell her?" "Everything, but carefully. If Blackwater has allies in the territorial government, we can't trust normal channels." Patience drafted a coded letter requesting Dr. Fairmont's urgent but discreet assistance. She included copies of the most damning evidence and suggested a secret meeting location. "Chen Wei works at a telegraph office in Sacramento," Magnus said, consulting his contact ledger. "She can send this without it going through local channels." While Magnus prepared for the dangerous ride to Sacramento, Patience continued analyzing Blackwater's records. Each document revealed new layers of corruption. The fake Federal Marshal Johnson was actually a hired gunman from Denver. His letters discussed eliminating problems permanently. The territorial officials Blackwater corresponded with were either fictional or bribed accomplices. Real territorial records showed no knowledge of his activities. Most shocking was the scope of his operation. Similar schemes were running in 6 other frontier towns, all coordinated from Deadwood Creek. He's not just a corrupt judge, Patience realized. He's running a criminal organization. Magnus returned from Sacramento 2 days later with confirmation that their message had been sent, but he brought disturbing news from town. "Blackwater's telling everyone the federal investigators will expose you as a fraud. He's already preparing a celebration." "What kind of celebration?" "Public trial, followed by public execution for marriage fraud and conspiracy." Patience felt ice in her veins. Blackwater wasn't just protecting himself. He was planning to eliminate them before Dr. Fairmont could respond. "When?" "Tomorrow night, right after the investigators arrive." They had less than 24 hours. Even if Dr. Fairmont received their message and responded immediately, she might not arrive in time. "We need backup plans," Patience said. "Like what?" "Deputy Millstone. I've been watching him during our town visits. He's not comfortable with Blackwater's methods." Magnus looked skeptical. "He's been following orders pretty faithfully." "Because he doesn't know the full truth." "What if we showed him our evidence?" "That's a massive risk. If he reports back to Blackwater, we're finished." Patience studied the photographs spread across their table. Evidence of systematic fraud, corruption, and criminal conspiracy. Truth powerful enough to topple Blackwater's entire operation. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save everything. Outside, Deputy Millstone began his evening patrol. Tomorrow would bring federal investigators, public trials, and potentially public executions. But tonight still offered one chance to change the outcome. Deputy Millstone sat alone at Murphy's saloon, nursing his 3rd whiskey of the evening. The weight of tomorrow's events pressed heavily on his shoulders. Public trials followed by executions always left him uneasy. Patience approached his table cautiously. She'd left Magnus waiting outside with the horses, ready for a quick escape if this confrontation went wrong. "Deputy Millstone." He looked up with bloodshot eyes. "Ma'am, shouldn't you be home preparing for tomorrow?" "That's what I want to talk about." She slid into the chair across from him. "May I sit?" Millstone gestured with his glass. The saloon was nearly empty. Just a few late drinkers hunched over their bottles. "I've got something to show you." Patience placed a small bundle of photographs on the scarred wooden table. "Evidence about Judge Blackwater you need to see." "Evidence of what?" "Fraud, corruption, criminal conspiracy." Millstone's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but something in Patience's calm demeanor stopped him from drawing. She spread the photographs methodically. Blackwater's forged appointment papers, his correspondence with fake federal officials, records of property seizures and fraudulent auctions. These documents prove Judge Blackwater was never legally appointed to his position. Millstone studied the images with growing confusion. "Where did you get these?" "From his own office. Look at the signatures on his appointment papers. Compare them to real territorial documents. She produced Magnus's collection of legitimate government correspondence. The differences were stark. Wrong seals, different paper stock, inconsistent formatting. Every ruling he's made is legally invalid, Patience continued. Every property seizure was theft. Every punishment was unlawful imprisonment. Millstone's face grew pale as the implications sank in. He'd been enforcing the orders of a criminal impersonating a judge. This Federal Marshal Johnson he's been corresponding with doesn't exist. I checked territorial records. He's actually a hired gunman from Denver. The deputy's hand shook as he reached for his whiskey glass. How long has this been going on? 2 years, maybe longer. He's stolen over $10,000 in property from innocent people. Millstone stared at the evidence spread before him. His entire career, his sense of duty, his belief in justice had all been built on lies. What do you want from me? Help us expose him before he destroys more lives. The federal investigators arrive tomorrow morning. They'll sort this out. Patience leaned forward urgently. Those aren't real federal investigators. Look at this telegram. She showed him a copy of Blackwater's correspondence arranging for fake officials to validate his authority and condemn her and Magnus. Tomorrow's trial is a setup. He plans to execute us and claim federal approval. The saloon door opened with a creak. Magnus entered and moved to their table, his massive frame casting shadows in the lamplight. Deputy, he nodded respectfully. Millstone looked between them. If this is all true, why didn't you come forward sooner? Because we needed proof, and because we weren't sure who we could trust. Magnus placed additional documents on the table. Letters from his rescued contacts, testimony about Blackwater's systematic targeting of vulnerable people. 47 people, all falsely accused, all stripped of their property before I could help them escape. Millstone examined the testimonials with growing horror, names he recognized, cases he'd helped investigate, all fraudulent. Mrs. Chen wasn't poisoning livestock. Rosa Martinez wasn't practicing medicine illegally. The Garrett family didn't default on their taxes. Each revelation hit Millstone like a physical blow. He'd participated in these injustices unknowingly, but participation nonetheless. What about tomorrow? We're expecting real help, Patience said. Dr. Isadora Fairmont from the territorial government. But she might not arrive in time. And if she doesn't? Magnus met his gaze steadily. Then we need someone with local authority to stand up for justice. The weight of decisions settled on Millstone's shoulders. Betraying Blackwater meant ending his career, possibly his life. But continuing to enforce fraudulent laws meant perpetuating criminal conspiracy. Show me everything. They spent the next hour reviewing evidence methodically. Property records, witness statements, correspondence, financial documents. The scope of Blackwater's criminal enterprise became undeniable. He's not just stealing from individuals, Patience explained. He's coordinating with associates in 6 other towns. This is organized crime on a territorial scale. Millstone studied a map showing the network of corrupt operations. Who else knows about this? Murphy from the general store, Banker Williams, that lawyer from Silver Creek. They're all buying stolen property at fraudulent auctions and splitting the profits with Blackwater. Exactly. As dawn approached, they heard horses arriving in town. Multiple riders moving with purpose toward the courthouse. The fake investigators, Magnus said grimly. Patience gathered their evidence carefully. Deputy, we need to know. Are you with us or against us? Millstone stood slowly, his hand resting on his badge. 2 years of faithful service to a criminal. Dozens of innocent people punished for crimes they didn't commit. A system of justice corrupted from within. I took an oath to uphold the law. Real law, not Blackwater's version. He unpinned his badge and set it on the table. Then he picked it up and pinned it back on. I'm still a deputy, but now I serve real justice. Outside, more horses approached. But these riders came from the east, not the west. Their pace was measured, official. Patience looked out the window and smiled for the first time in days. "Dr. Fairmont!" A convoy of territorial officials dismounted in the pre-dawn light. Real badges, real authority, real justice finally arriving in Deadwood Creek. But Judge Blackwater was already moving to intercept them, flanked by his fake federal investigators and armed associates. The confrontation that would determine everything was about to begin. The town square filled rapidly as word spread through Deadwood Creek. Judge Blackwater had called an emergency meeting to expose the marriage fraud and restore order. Townspeople gathered with the eager anticipation of witnesses to justice. Dr. Isadora Fairmont arrived with 3 territorial marshals, their badges gleaming in the morning sunlight. She was a stern woman in her 50s, carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to difficult situations. Blackwater approached her with practiced charm. "Dr. Fairmont, thank you for coming. We have a serious case of marriage fraud and conspiracy that requires immediate attention." "Indeed we do," Dr. Fairmont replied coolly, "though perhaps not the case you're expecting." Magnus and Patience emerged from the saloon, flanked by Deputy Millstone. The crowd parted as they walked toward the makeshift tribunal Blackwater had arranged in the square. "There are the criminals," Blackwater announced loudly. "The woman who stole from our community and the man who helped her escape justice through fraudulent marriage." Dr. Fairmont studied the assembled crowd with calculating eyes. "Before we proceed, I'd like to examine some evidence that's come to my attention." Patience stepped forward, carrying the organized documentation they'd prepared. "Dr. Fairmont, we have substantial proof of criminal activity in Deadwood Creek." "Lies and fabrications," Blackwater interrupted. "Desperate attempts to avoid prosecution." "Then you won't mind if we examine the evidence publicly," Dr. Fairmont replied. She gestured for Patience to continue. Patience's voice carried clearly across the silent square. "Judge Blackwater has been operating without legal authority for 2 years. His appointment papers are fraudulent." She held up the photographed documents, explaining the discrepancies in seals, signatures, and official formatting. The crowd murmured with growing confusion. "Furthermore, he's been systematically stealing property from innocent people through false accusations and rigged auctions." The evidence mounted methodically: property seizures, witness testimonies, correspondence with fake federal officials. Each revelation struck the crowd like a physical blow. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward from the assembled townspeople. "My husband's farm was stolen. We had receipts proving we paid our taxes." Jake Morrison joined her. "I saw the same 3 men bidding at every auction. Always the same winners, always the same low prices." More voices rose from the crowd. Victims who'd been too frightened to speak before found courage in numbers. Stories of lost homes, seized businesses, trumped-up charges. Judge Blackwater's face reddened with fury. "These are lies orchestrated by criminals. Where are your federal investigators? I demand official validation of my authority." Dr. Fairmont smiled grimly. "Your federal investigators? You mean these gentlemen?" The territorial marshals stepped forward, surrounding the 3 men Blackwater had introduced as federal officials. Thomas Kane, wanted for impersonating federal officers; William Cross, wanted for fraud in Colorado territory; and Samuel Jones, wanted for assault in Kansas. The fake investigators found themselves in shackles before they could react. Blackwater's confident expression crumbled as his allies were arrested. "This is preposterous," he sputtered. "I am the duly appointed judge of this district." Dr. Fairmont produced official territorial records. "According to our files, this district has no appointed judge." Judge William Crawford died 18 months ago. No replacement was ever confirmed. She held up Blackwater's forged appointment papers, alongside authentic documents. "These forgeries are quite sophisticated, but ultimately worthless." Deputy Millstone stepped forward. "Dr. Fairmont, I have additional evidence of conspiracy involving local merchants and territorial corruption." He presented the documents implicating Murphy, Banker Williams, and their associates in the fraudulent property scheme. The crowd's mood shifted dramatically. Anger that had been directed at Patience and Magnus now turned toward the real criminals. Voices called for justice, for restitution, for accountability. Dr. Fairmont raised her hand for silence. "Cornelius Blackwater, You're under arrest for impersonating a federal official, theft, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. As the territorial marshals placed Blackwater in custody, he looked directly at Patience with undisguised hatred. This won't stand. I have friends in high places. Had friends, Dr. Fairmont corrected. Most of them are already in custody. Your network extended further than you realized, but so did our investigation. With Blackwater removed, attention turned to restoring justice for his victims. Dr. Fairmont appointed Deputy Millstone as temporary lawkeeper until proper officials could be assigned. The fraudulent property auctions were declared invalid. Seized assets would be returned to their rightful owners. Victims would receive compensation from Blackwater's confiscated wealth. Mrs. Henderson wept as she learned her husband's farm would be restored. Jake Morrison volunteered to help other victims navigate the legal process of reclaiming their property. As the crowd dispersed, many townspeople approached Patience and Magnus with apologies and gratitude. The woman they'd tried to bury alive had exposed the corruption that had plagued their community for years. Dr. Fairmont pulled them aside privately. Your evidence gathering was exceptional. Have you considered legal work professionally? Patience exchanged glances with Magnus. We have other commitments. People who need help in situations like this. The underground network, Dr. Fairmont nodded knowingly. We're aware of your activities, Mr. Coleridge. Territorial officials have been quietly grateful for your interventions. Magnus looked surprised. You know about the rescues? 47 people helped to safety. Not one of them actually guilty of their accused crimes. Your work saved lives. She handed Patience an official document. Legal certification. As territorial legal advisor, your skills could help many more people through proper channels. That evening, Magnus and Patience sat on their cabin porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The marriage certificate that had saved her life lay on the table between them. So, Magnus said quietly, what happens now? Patience picked up the certificate, studying the document that had transformed from desperate fiction into something deeper. We could make it real, continue helping people together, but as actual partners. Magnus nodded slowly. I'd like that. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling truly safe for the first time since arriving in Deadwood Creek. Our first case should be helping the other victims rebuild their lives. And after that, we find the next town that needs justice. Below them, Deadwood Creek settled into peaceful evening. Corruption had been exposed, justice restored, and hope renewed. The woman who'd nearly been buried alive had risen to become the architect of her community's salvation. Their real work was just beginning.